Alan, la pregunta en esta sección de variaciones se basa en los paneles 7 y 8 de la exposición sobre la reinterpretación en las casas bogotanas de lo que se ha llamado el estilo neo-Tudor o Tudor Revival y su extensión en la ciudad. El panel 7 muestra el mapeo de este estilo extendido en cerca de 30 barrios, 1.500 casas existentes, estableciendo un caso único en Latinoamérica. El mapeo se hizo con base en el panel 8, donde se definieron los llamados elementos del estilo, que se cuantificaron según su presencia en estas casas. Los elementos son componentes arquitectónicos que cualifican la estructura espacial de la casa, tanto si ésta corresponde al hall intermedio o a sus variaciones. Alan, ¿qué opinión tienes sobre estos elementos del estilo y el extenso número de estas casas en Bogotá? ¿Tienes
Uh,
ahora?
well, I was fascinated to learn about these houses and how many there are, and would like to know more about how England was perceived and why this particular style was popular at this time, rather than, for example, a French model, which one might imagine. Whether it's to do with direct contact with English life and style, whether English people are in Bogota, whether it comes from the literature, and indeed everything else about it, which there won't be time to explain in detail. I think I would say I would never mistake any of these houses for being in England. And I haven't quite worked out how, but they just are different. And in terms of their middle halls, they appear to play a different role, perhaps not very different to what we've seen already. And they are really just sort of central circulation spaces of the kind that runs through the 19th century in England, that you need to join the rooms up. And a hall is a very convenient way to do that in planning terms. And also, if it accommodates the staircase, you get it all in one space. And more specialized rooms form a kind of periphery around this central exchange space, if you like. So I think that's all I have to say at this point.
La asimilación de este patrón arquitectónico inglés, como lo veíamos ayer, no solo ha determinado un periodo específico de la ciudad, sino que sigue marcando la imagen urbana hoy en día de algunos barrios del sector o centro oriental de la ciudad. En esta sección se intenta hacer una demostración empírica de la extensión del fenómeno a través de un mapeo realizado con base en el acopio de unos datos cuantificables sobre el territorio. Esta cuantificación de casos se hizo identificando y desglosando esos elementos arquitectónicos propios del estilo neo-Tudor, como el tipo de cubierta, el bay windows, la chimenea, el tratamiento material de la fachada, etc. La incidencia, regularidad y precisión con que se aplicaron los estándares estilísticos presenta un amplio margen de diversificación en función de esas características urbanas, sociales y económicas de los barrios. Definidos entonces estos ciertos parámetros de medición, fue posible delimitar un área de estudio que abarca alrededor de 30 barrios, como lo está demostrado en la exposición, donde se localizaron alrededor de unas 1.500 casas construidas hoy en día en pie, a las que habría que sumar un número no despreciable de casas desaparecidas, especialmente en la zona norte de la ciudad. La lógica combinatoria de estos elementos implica un espectro de variaciones que los arquitectos aplicaron de forma consciente, mientras que los constructores y residentes de algunos barrios más populares los copiaron de forma más espontánea e informal. De esta forma, el mapeo, concebido como como un factor clave de investigación, permitió verificar la considerable propagación de estos patrones estilísticos en la ciudad, estableciendo un caso inusitado en el contexto latinoamericano.
Hay en arquitectura un enfoque analítico que distingue entre tipo y estilo. En la investigación se conjetura que distintos estilos pueden versionar una misma estructura formal, un tipo arquitectónico, que se designa en este caso como casa con hall intermedio. Y en la exposición se rastrea su presencia a través del tiempo, de modo que sirve para describir la casa a la inglesa, las casas quinta eclécticas y muchas del movimiento moderno. La casa de la ciudad colonial, sin embargo, no obedece a ese tipo, pues en lugar del hall es un patio el elemento principal, aunque exista un salón principal también. Podemos ensayar aquí una comparación. En la casa colonial existe el zaguán, un porche que desemboca en un patio donde puede haber uno o más pórticos. En la casa, la inglesa, también un porche precede a un espacio principal, como es el hall, pero la experiencia espacial no es equivalente, pues en el primer caso, desde la calle, a través del zaguán, se puede ver el patio con sus pórticos sin que la privacidad se vea amenazada, mientras que en la tradición inglesa la privacidad se resguarda con artificios como el Springs Passage, que obliga a un giro de 90 grados para llegar a ver el hall. Aunque los rasgos característicos de la casa a la inglesa, como son la cubierta inclinada, los gabletes, el arco neo-Tudor, la bay window, etc., son los que como signos de un lenguaje permitieron identificarlas dentro del tejido de Bogotá, nos preguntamos aquí si también el tipo arquitectónico podría considerarse como otro elemento del estilo, a pesar de no tener un valor semántico, sino sintáctico, es decir, de pertenecer a la forma de la casa y no a su figura.
Like to highlight that the intermediate hall, despite its apparent rigidity, allowed for variations in its composition. The original Tudor house in England had a flexible relationship between the internal distribution of the house and how it related to the exterior and its vertical development, both in section and elevation. The middle hall allowed various accents through vertical axes related to the bay window, the chimneys, and the gables, which tended to break the axial symmetry, more typical of Italian and French traditions. This flexibility in the composition of the facade was well understood and assimilated by the Bogotá architects. In Bogotá, rather than a generic English style, it seems appropriate to speak of a reinterpretation of what has been called Neo-Tudor or Tudor Revival as a plausible late influence of the arts and crafts movement. This stylistic influence allows us to understand better some features that tend to be generalized within the architectural elements that make up the house. Along with the front garden, these elements were the pitched roofs, the chimneys, the gable, the attic, the doors, the shape of the windows, the use of the bay window, the mullions, and the facade materials such as exposed brickwork, stonework, or timber frame. As Victor has just pointed out, the imaginative use and combination of these elements produced variations that the architects applied thoroughly and consciously, while builders working in popular neighborhoods also did, but in a more informal and spontaneous way.
Thank you. There are so many different things to think about here. And indeed, this brings us into contact with some of the fundamental ways of interpreting architecture generally as function and as image. And my feeling is that most of the way that architecture is considered assumes rationality. But perhaps this is wrong. When I was thinking about the development of modern architecture in England in particular, I thought about the question of metaphor. Now, a metaphor is a figure of speech in which, in order to describe something, you use a term which is unlike the thing itself. And that way you recreate the meaning of something that is maybe overfamiliar. So looking at some of the houses of the 1920s in England, where the arts and crafts had perhaps become overripe, over-exaggerated, a caricature of itself. And if you look through the books and magazines of this period, not all of them are like that, but some of them are. They have to strive for more and more effect and become more exaggerated in their forms. And I thought, well, this is a house portrayed as a house. And in the end, that's not interesting. That's a kind of cliche, a tautology. You know, we don't want to understand a house by showing a house. We want to know something different about a house. So we make a house into a hospital, a factory, which is what a modern house is. And that way we recover some of the qualities of houseness because we are testing them through the metaphor. I hope this isn't too far-fetched or extraordinary. But what I see in the houses of Bogota is this essentially completely irrational adoption of a language that has no place to be in Bogota culturally, but obviously serves a purpose. It is making a picture of a house-like house for people who do not otherwise have that image. And perhaps it is satisfying to the people who are there because there's no other explanation for it that I can think of. It is entirely irrational. But it obviously was very popular. It satisfied people's emotional needs. And that is what I perceive from this, rather more than the very specific things about house planning or style or decoration, is a more general sense of deploying an architectural language in a, as I say, a poetic way, if you like. The larger question around this, I think, is are we still doing this without knowing it? Because I suspect it's unconscious in many cases. What do we think of architectural language? I feel very strongly about this, that architects are always engaged in linguistic generation of meaning and activity, but often they don't know what they're doing. Maybe it's better that way. It's only later, perhaps, that the historians can come along and try and interpret it. So I think I'm happy to give you this rather heretical interpretation of architectural language, and I would be interested in any responses.